Welcome to the 532nd episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Thanks for listening. Well, I just got back from Alabama, and we ran the Coldwater Creek 50K. It is part of the Lifetime Fitness Corporation's events, part of the Leadville series of trials and races. It is a way to get a Leadville qualifier, and that was one of the reasons why it attracted us. But it's not that far from Florida, and it provides for some opportunities to do some technical trail work. So that's what we signed up for, and that's what we headed out to do. A 50K is supposed to be 31.1 miles long. This one turned out to be 33.2 miles long. And again, when you're running on the trails, it's pretty hard to measure distance accurately. And when you're in the woods, different devices, Garmin, Coros, Apple, may get different mileages depending on where the satellites are and which satellites are utilized. So there is some variation, and most ultra run directors will say that that's just bonus miles. So, no complaining if you're an ultra runner for a little extra mileage for your money. But this was 33.2 miles, and it kind of counted as I'll tell you this story. So I got to say, I went into this race feeling pretty healthy. I've had a few niggles here and there, did some sort of crazy upper back strain, but everything was on the up and up. Got a little cold the week before, but I was feeling good going into this race, and probably was close to being in a healthy position from where I have been in the past. So ankles wasn't a problem, didn't have any sciatica. So for 63 years old, not bad going into this race, looking good. I would say we think there's around 200 and some entered. I think about 100 and some showed up, close to 200 maybe, but I don't know the actual numbers. And it was in the small town of Anniston, Alabama, which is close to Oxford, Alabama, which is not close to much else. I think if you're a football fan, Auburn is probably closer than University of Alabama. But other than that, my Alabama geography is not all that great. I will tell you that Alabama people are really cool and really special. I had a good time running with several and enjoyed their Alabama twang as we ran and as they told me of little towns that they were from and where they had been and the different trails around the area. And being from West Virginia, I was often asked, I don't see your accent, or I don't notice an accent from you being from West Virginia. And it's like West Virginia has twangs, but we're not quite southern enough to have the real good drawl until you get down to southern West Virginia. And where I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia, it was a college town closer to Pennsylvania. So there was a wide variety of accents, you might say, but nothing near the southern drawl of my new friends in Alabama. And it was, again, quite entertaining as we ran through the woods, trying to figure out where the top of these climbs actually were and where they weren't. And so we shared some frustrations together. But everybody we met in Alabama, actually very, very nice, very, very hospitable. If you're thinking about going to Alabama, go. It's a great time. One thing I also didn't know is, I knew there was going to be a trail running, and we knew that there were going to be 5 climbs in this race that were pretty significant. And I actually did my homework and drew upon old geometry equations to figure out the grades of these said climbs, because we're not at altitude in Alabama. I think the highest altitude we got was around 1,200 feet above sea level. But there were some pretty steep climbs, and they lasted for a while. So there were some climbs that were any place from reportedly 1.5 to 3.5 miles long. And the grades on average were something around, 2.5% to 6%. Doesn't sound too bad. And there were 4 aid stations. They were roughly 7 to 8 miles apart. So it doesn't sound too bad. And if you go to race websites, they'll give you an elevation profile. So you could actually put your little marker on top of where the peak was and know about where the top of these climbs would be. And you could also put your little marker and know about where the aid stations would be. But that didn't tend to correlate with what actually happened. This particular course was a running course, a trail, but also a very popular mountain bike course. And so they were also having a mountain bike race both on Friday and Saturday as well. So if you looked at the course from a runner's perspective, it looked a little bit more like a mountain bike course than a runner course. They had some jumps and up and down. I wouldn't have wanted to been on a mountain bike either, but if you were a mountain biker and like those kind of things, I guess it would be a great opportunity. Nevertheless, we started out at 7:45 on Friday morning because they were having a race on Saturday as well. There's an hour difference between Florida, so it was actually good, so we didn't have to get up really, really early or anything. And started out in downtown Anniston at about 46 degrees, which is about 40 degrees cooler than what I'm used to right now. The course started out of town, took us up a paved highway. We crossed over a little 4-lane road and then up a private access road to then hit the trail. And the trail was mostly what people call single track, so about 3 feet wide, but it was dirt and rocks, some pine needles, some roots, not much. Not just a few sections of where there was pine needles and roots. So the most part, rocks and dirt. A little bit of sand, but again, not much to speak of. Rocks and dirt. The rocks were about softball size. Some were loose, some were together, some were spread out, some were pointy, some stood up, but there were rocks, and there were lots of rocks, which was good because I wanted to run a technical trail and practice on a technical trail, and I got to practice on a technical trail. I am happy to report that I did not land on the ground the whole race, and that was one of my goals. Accomplished. Through the course of 33.2 miles, we climbed a total of 4,442 feet, and we descended 4,445 feet before we came to a completion. In other words, we were either going up or down, and there was very little flat. Even in the road section, I guess on the road on the way in, it was fairly flat, and straight, even on the last 10th Street. So my coach had given me a plan, and I intended to follow the plan to best of my ability, including getting up 2 hours early and having a breakfast, which I did, which was oatmeal, and 10 minutes before the start, taking a gel, which was 100 calories, and then proceeding on the first 5K to do my usual get the kinks out, diesel, warm up. So I'm never really fast out of the gate. So again, no pressure, no hurry, just get warmed up. And really, between the road and going up a hill and getting on the technical trail, I felt like I warmed up pretty good and settled into either power walking or running, and pretty comfortable and loosened up pretty quick into the race. So I thought that was a good sign. There were some people around us, and we went back and forth with them because, again, a trail being about 2-3 feet wide, passing on the left, passing on your left, and, back and forth with some people, and was trying to actually keep up a pace to keep ahead of some people and pushing the pace pretty good. And that was the idea, to run this race comfortably hard, or push the pace a little bit. And so I wasn't out of control, but I was trying to move as fast as I could. The other thing, I was given an assignment that I could run 4 minutes and walk 1 minute. Well, when you're going up and down the hills, that doesn't always work out. And when you're trying to stay ahead of people, that doesn't always work out. But when I could, I would try to do the 4-1 to try to save some of my legs. Now, my new method of walking is to walk like I don't want to get past. So it's power walking, not recovery walking. So I was trying to walk as fast as I possibly could anytime I walked. And again, run uncomfortable, but not redlining it. So that was the plan, and that worked pretty good for the first 15 miles. And again, we were up and down, up and down, up and down, and zigzagging with some people. And it was going good. The temperature rose pretty quick, so it was 40s. I was warmed up really within a few miles and very comfortable most of the morning. It didn't get to the 70s until afternoon, and even then it was warmish, but we were in the woods, so it was always covered. That we were never in full sun. We were never completely exposed, always in the woods the whole day long. It was funny because we had the discussion whether or not we might need a headlamp, but since it's only 31.5 miles, but really 32.5 miles, and that we thought we would run a little faster than we did, we didn't really think we needed a headlamp. And that was true, but almost not true. So I did my homework on the elevations, and I did my homework on the degree of vertical climbing, and I did my homework on where the aid stations were. But I didn't do my homework on if there were cutoff times. I knew the race had a total time cutoff time around 10 hours, but I didn't think I'd need that at all, so it didn't really bother me. I just thought I would run my race and see how fast I could go, and everything will go good. And I was hoping really for someplace around 8.5 hours was the idea. The race had aid stations that were reported to be fairly limited. They were going to have goo gels, which I don't usually use, and goo electrolyte drink, which I usually don't use, and water, and then some snacks. If you've ever seen those Bobo PB&J cookies, they were going to have those, and some various other cookies and chips, but not a whole lot of options, because again, these aid stations were in the woods, and pretty much everything had to be four-wheelered up there to get water and all the supplies. So they couldn't really have a lot to offer, which was fine. And I decided that I didn't want to carry all that much either, so I decided I would use a combination of my own gels and bars and theirs. Even though I knew I didn't like goo products that well, I thought I could buck up and suffer through. In retrospect, that wasn't probably the greatest idea, because I really don't like those things. They're thick like icing, and after a few of them, it's just become difficult to get them down. But anyway, that's where I was. So I was carrying Huma gels, I was carrying Precision gels, I carried Nature Bakery brownies, I carried a waffle that is a plant-based maple syrup type waffle that goes down okay. And then 2 bottles of water, 2 soft flasks that I could carry water in. I carried a third flask in case I wanted to add that on, but I never used the third flask. I might have been able to. It might have been better if I had in one section, but I didn't. Like I said, things were going pretty good until mile 15. We're really kind of hitting the splits that we wanted, and the pace was pretty good. Still hanging on into that, looking like that 8.5 hour mark. And then after about mile 15, comes the first really big climb, and it was a long Jeep road that seemed to go on forever, and it was pretty much straight. There wasn't switchbacks. Most of the other climbs throughout the day were switchbacks. You go one way, then the other way, and the curves were banked. And I turned, the course turned and twisted so many times, I couldn't even tell you where I was. I mean, I was completely lost to whether I was heading east, west, north, or south, if I was getting close to a turnaround or not. I had no concept. It was like being spun around in a circle and trying to figure out which way you were going. I had no idea where I was, other than mile 15, 0.5 should be the halfway mark, and we should be turning around to go the other end. And we started the climb, and the climb was long, and there was no running on the first big climb. It was a power walk, and we were power walking pretty much as hard as we could and doing well. And it was a long climb, and maybe went a little bit longer than we thought. But nevertheless, got to the top of it. Was a little tired, little fatigued on eating goos. And having a little sluggish moment. And it's not unlike me to have that mile 18 to 20 sluggish moment where I just assume enjoy the weather and not really care about pace so much. And I kind of lost sight of my prescribed game plan from my coach. I don't think she listens to this podcast, so we'll hope she doesn't. And I was just, I'm going to do the best I can. But it's getting tough. My feet were hurting a little bit. I actually took there's a thing called salt stick electrolyte chewable tablets, and they've scared me in the past because they've caused me some GI distress. But I pop one of those in my water, and I chew one of those, and they actually did help. I was having some cramping in my feet, and I couldn't tell whether or not it was because of all the rocks I was pounding on, or whether my feet I was truly having some electrolyte issues or anything. But that seemed to help. I had a couple near misses with falls, tripped with my right foot, my left leg went flying, and somehow my hamstring on my left leg felt like I was going to, pull it. But, I come to my senses and I didn't fall down and I was okay. Michael and I were running together and I saw him fly through the air behind me one time, but he managed to get his feet down on the ground again somehow. At one point it looked like it was going to be bad, but neither one of us fell. But we just had kind of a sluggish moment that we're just, kind of grinding, and the times were starting to drift down, and motivation was starting to drift down a little bit. And I was kind of just enjoying hanging out with my new Alabama friends and hiking as good as I can and running some and jogging, but not being too awful worried about the time until one of the guys said, we're getting close to cutoff. And it's like, cutoff? What do you mean cutoff? And he said, yeah, we have to get to a certain aid station by 4:30. And it's like, well, what time is it now? I had no idea what time of day it was. My watch gives me all these different numbers as far as my heart rate and the altitude and climbing and time and pace and all this kind of, but I'd have to scroll, and I even had a map on it, so I wouldn't get lost, but I didn't scroll to see what time it was. And one of them said, we're, such and such a time. It's like, we shouldn't have any problem getting there. But again, I'm used to running faster. I'm used to running my marathon time. So when you look at running on the road versus running on the trails, the times are different, and the day goes by pretty quick when you're just zigzagging back and forth on switchbacks through the woods. And so it was getting a little dicey as far as, were we going to get there on time? But we made that aid station, and again, wasn't feeling all that perky. Was running when I could, walking and power walking as fast as I could otherwise, but those two were more like walking than they were power anything for the most part. And just, kind of having a little pity party and recognizing that I was, and trying to take in more calories. But again, the goose weren't doing me such a good thing, and I kept popping them, but I didn't like them, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, one of our friends come up behind us and a little bit. He said, we really have to hurry because we're going to miss this next cutoff at the last aid station. And it's again, what time is it? What time do we have to be there? And it's like, I think we have to be there by 4:30. And, we're trying to do the math because, again, we didn't know how many miles were between. We were supposed to get to the top of this climb at mile 25, and we're at mile 28. And we still haven't got to the top of the climb. And that was a little demoralizing because I was disappointed because the aid stations weren't where I thought they were going to be, and the top of the hills weren't where I thought they were going to be. And so how do we know when the aid station's going to be? So we should be there if the aid station's where it's supposed to be, but if it's not, we have no idea. So it came down to doing, it's like, well, we're going to do the best we can and see what happens. So we're running along this ridge, and finally we look down to the left, and we see a couple trucks, and it's like, oh my goodness, here's like a campsite. It's like, we must be, it's the aid station. And we're on this trail, and the trucks weren't that far away through the woods. So I assumed that we would just kind of veer off on this path and go right into the aid station. And they yelled at us and said, well, you have a minute left. You got to hurry. And again, I wasn't that worried because it looked like we would just veer off the trail and be at the aid station. But no, there were more switchbacks. So we had like 2 or 3 switchbacks to like bust ourselves. Now we're really running. Forget about the walk running. Forget about the pity party. Now it's full on emergency trying to get to the aid station and not get cut, because we never thought in the beginning of the day, that's the last thing on my mind, the thought I was going to get cut. So we really, busted ourselves to try to get to the aid station on time. And we got there, and they's like, you just made it, but you got to leave really quick. And so we didn't get to peruse the aid station table or anything. Didn't take any gels or anything. Got a half of a little glass of Coke to walk with, a Dixie cup full of Coke, and out we went. And they said, you got to hurry, because you're not going to make the cutoff for the whole race. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense because we thought we had 10 hours, or somebody said 10:15 to get there. And again, we were almost at mile 30. And the course was supposed to be 31.1 miles. So how bad could it be? We have all this time to get there. But they said, no, you've got like a mile or so to get to the main road. And once you get to the main road, then there's a mile to the finish line. So, again, it was a little demoralizing. And I was kind of, we really hurried and kind of busted ourselves to get to that aid station and kind of shot what energy we had. When it comes to saying you always have a little bit more than you think you do, you do. But we kind of shot it right there, and it's like, well, now what are we going to do? And it's like, I think we got plenty of time. I might just have to walk this in or, walk, run it. I just, I told Michael, so I just don't know that I can get in much more of a hurry than I am. And, but we tried, we said some mile, and we came out to this, power line. And when we started the race, we came up through a power line. So we thought, well, we got to be close to where the road was. You could hear the road. You could hear that it should be not that far away, just down over the hill. And somehow there must be some sort of a trail that goes along this power line and takes us down to, the road. And no, there was just more switchbacks, out and back and out and back. And I pretty much was losing my motivation for these switchbacks. And when are we ever going to come out of this thing? And my, give a hoot was, about gone as far as I don't care if we make it or not, but I did. And it's like, how much more of this? And, knew we had to cross this road and go downtown. Well, anyway, we finally, hit this, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And we finally come down to where we crossed the road. And we did remember the directions that when you come down to cross this 4-lane highway, the police will be there to stop traffic, and to give them time to stop traffic on a 4-lane highway, they had set up these barricades that you do this again, back and forths, to run up and down these barricades until they could stop traffic. So again, instead of being on the road, we're going to go up and down this plastic chute, up and down until traffic gets stopped. So, thank you, officers, that they were there, and I felt really bad because they were waiting for us. Because we were the last 3 souls. There were one woman in front of us. So there were the last 3 souls coming down off of this hill. And we're back and forth. And we come across the road. And they said, we've been waiting on you. And it's like, really, we've been waiting on you too. Because we thought you would be here. I thought we'd hit the road at mile 30, not mile 32. And so we came down. And at this time, we don't know. And there's also what's called a sweeper bike behind us. So the sweep, which I've never had happen to me before. The sweep was behind us saying, you're the last 2 people on the course. You got to get going. You got to get going. So this mountain bike was on our tails going down through this last mile and a half with his squeaky brakes, behind us, which was not really helping my temperament much. And it's like, could you just hang back a little bit? I know we're trying to hurry. I know we're last. We're doing the best we can, but this is just the squeaky brake thing is not really helping me. So we got down on the road and the bikes were beside us, the sweeper bikes. And it's like, could you find out maybe how far we've got? I didn't know if we had a mile to go or a mile and a half to go. And I didn't know that, the time. And I thought we had time, but, at this point, everything we thought we knew, we didn't know. So now we're actually cruising again. We're running down a road. So we're on, back in my, my safe zone. I'm running on concrete, which is my forte. And so we've really picked up the pace, and we're running in like we knew what we were doing. And it's kind of embarrassing because, we were dilly-dallying along up in the woods, but now we've got something to run. We're running for the finish line. And finally we run down, about a half a mile, and we make a right turn onto 10th Street, which was the finish street. And if you looked, at the end of the street, as far as you could see a little finishing chute. And of course, we were trying to guess what the distance was, and we did have plenty of time by then to get there. But nevertheless, we're the last, 3 people coming in, dragging our sorry arses, down the road. And it kind of felt bad, and felt like a loser and, old, a loser and all those things as we were coming down. And then the announcer started. He said, come out of the bars, come out of the restaurants. We have to bring these last 3 runners home. And so they started assimilating all the masses to come to bring these 3 lost souls out of the woods back across the finish line. And they announced our names well before we got there, waiting for us to come in. Michael Hubbard, 61, from Claremont, Florida. And Jamila, she didn't say Jamila, they said Jamela Dulaney from Port Charlotte, Florida, 63 years old. Let's bring them in, and give them, a round of applause. And for, they're our heroes, and we were their heroes because we were old people that finally made it to the finish line for the most part. But nevertheless, they were cheering for us, and it became funny then. And of course, we kept running, and we ran proudly across the finish line, high-fiving, and people were cheering. And we were those two people that crossed the finish line dead last. To a warm welcome from all the people in the town of Anniston, all 25 people that came out of the restaurants to greet us home. But nevertheless, we finished and we did it. And we got the giggles because, again, here we are, the old folks crossing the line. We're out here with all the kids, and everybody's waiting for us to do the awards, essentially, waiting to have the birthday cake and waiting for these two old folks to come in through the finish line. During the race, I got asked by my Alabama friends, "Can I ask how old you are?" And I told them, and then, a couple things. And of course, everybody says, you're their inspiration. And it's hard to feel like you're somebody's inspiration when you finish dead last. But nevertheless, we made light of it. And, the reality of it is there were 9 people that started the race that didn't finish. So we were technically ahead of those people. And technically, we were ahead of all the people that didn't show up, the 200 and some people that didn't show up for the race. So we were ahead of those people. And technically, we were ahead of all the other people that were in their 60s that didn't show up the race or didn't sign the race. So it wasn't completely horrible. And we did have a wonderful, wonderful time. And the weather was great. And the award was nice. And then we sat around and they gave out awards. The people were top in our age group, and one of our members of our practice, Sandy Geisel, I'm proud to say, was second in her age group. She could have been first, but she was polite. So she was second in our age group, and they called out the rest of the age groupers, and then they had a raffle. And the raffle they drew, if you finished the race, you got to put your bib number in the box, and they drew for tickets to go to, they called them coins, gold coins, to be able to register for the Leadville 100-mile race. And wouldn't you know it, the two dead last people, Michael and I, got our names drawn. So we have coins, and we registered for the Leadville 100 race, the one that I didn't finish in August. And so it was kind of funny that, the dead last people got on a 33.2-mile race, just got an entry into a 100-mile race that will be significantly harder. But nevertheless, we're in, and we, kind of did the Harvey Korman shuffle across the parking lot to get our coins, and people were cheering and very, very friendly, and we got our coins. And that was the end of the race, so to speak. So, it was a learning experience. I tried taping my big toes because I typically get blisters under my toenails. I still got blisters under my toenails. I did use my Salty Britches lube on my other toes, and they did good. We actually had great time soaking up the finish line, cheering. People are so gracious in the ultra world. And so friendly, and again, made new friends in Alabama, and it was really good. The running on the rocks was really good experience. It's good practice for Leadville, because if there's any place that has more rocks than Alabama, it's Leadville, Colorado. And so it was good practice, and I actually felt like my technical running was better for the most part, or most of the day there, than it had been. So, I'm making some moves. I didn't get hurt. I didn't fall down. That was a pretty good day all in all. So that was a great race in Anniston, Alabama, Coldwater 50K. I would recommend it if you run 50Ks to give it a shot. They also had, I believe, a 15K race. So if you want to get into trails, they had it. Then they had the 2 mountain bike distances. Food, plant-based food in Anniston was great. We went to a Thai restaurant, and there was a mellow mushroom pizza place there. near the hotel. So we had that the night we got in from driving there. So that was good. There's a place in Georgia that we always stop that also has Thai food. We can get good vegetables. And there's a place in Sarasota, Florida that's called Fresh Kitchen that you can get bowls of different vegetables and things like that too. So that was good. So finding plant-based food was not bad. Even at the hotel, they had grits that were made without butter or milk. So we had grits in the morning. So that was good as well. Good pre-race food. I was really glad that my don't give a hoot attitude didn't let me just walk and miss the cutoffs. I'm glad we fought for the cutoffs and made it in. It certainly made the day and the story much, much better. But it also was a learning experience. I don't really like fighting the cutoffs. I mean, one of the learning experience would be, make sure you know where the cutoffs are. My mindfulness coach had told me in the past that, what are you going to do with cutoffs? You're going to run the best you can, and the cutoffs are what the cutoffs are. But it might have been a little bit more motivating had I known about the cutoffs early on, that I maybe wouldn't have dilly-dallied and run a little bit more scared and probably would have done a little bit more well. So that was a learning experience for the most part. It was also a good learning experience. I mean, everybody knows you got a little bit more to give than you've given. Nobody ever falls across the finish line for the most part. I've seen it a couple times, but for the most part, everybody has the finish line kick. So you have a little bit more left in the tank, even though you don't think you do. And it was nice to kind of, use that little kick and need it, I guess, and give it all we had to get across the finish line. But I got to say, I would have liked to have backed it up more, so that wouldn't have been quite such an issue. And hopefully it won't the next race. Our next race is the Coldwater Creek 45K, which I believe is 28 miles. And so I want to make sure that we know those cutoffs and don't dilly-dally around and start to enjoy the weather too much and not get in. I don't think that I'll probably rely on aid station gels in the future and probably have more of my own stuff if it means packing another pound or two in my vest. So be it. I think that would have probably helped me out a little bit more. We've been doing some training on this place up in Sarasota, this hill called Celery Field Hill. That's I mentioned in the previous podcast. It's not very big. It was basically a drainage fill that you can go up and down various places. It's about a mile around, and there's a couple switchbacks and a couple straight up and downs. And we had been doing the, hike up and then run down as hard as you could. And that really helped because going downhill is hard on your quads. And my quads actually never really bothered me too bad. My coach said that every 5 miles I was supposed to do a total body assessment and see how I felt. And I did it a couple times. I didn't do it well because I didn't motivate myself. But I did tell myself a few times, it's like, I don't know why you're going, you're slowing down here because really nothing's that bad. My feet were a little sore. I was a little tired in general, but my quads nothing was killing me. It just wasn't moving very fast. So I got some work to do on that self-assessment and self-motivation a little bit to keep things going. Nevertheless, we had some laughs over it. If you've made it this far, this is a plant-based wellness podcast. And I just have been talking, other than the restaurants, haven't really been talking about plant-based anything too awful much. And we say plant-based, we mean that, we eat plants and try to eat a wide variety. And it's typically a pretty high carbohydrate diet. And I've always always believed, as do my other physician counterparts, that you can get a nutritionally adequate plant-based diet without eating animal products. And the only thing that you really need to supplement is B12. Get the B12 from dirt. Cows eat the B12. You eat the cow. That's how people that eat animals get the B12. But the only thing you do have to really supplement as a plant-based eater is a B12 tablet. And if you have nutritional yeast, sometimes it's in there, sometimes it's in fortified milk. And so it varies. You should get your levels checked. You need a B12 over 500 to have adequate neurological function, as well as make blood cells and so forth. So you always want to make sure B12 is adequate. The other thing is vitamin D. Vitamin D comes from the sun. We aren't outside near enough. That's why I think these races are so great. I got to spend the whole day outside, and although I wasn't in direct sunlight, I was outside all day long, and I got some sun. And that's really good to make vitamin D. It works with your cholesterol, and you make all kinds of different hormones and cell membranes, and that's very important. And over the years, people have asked me, well, don't you need fat for your brain? Don't you need fat for your brain? This high carbohydrate diet, why would you, is that healthy? And I've always given the answer that, you're wearing fat. So if your brain needs fat, it can take it from where you're wearing it. And I've been a little bit curt about how I've said that. And we get essential, and basically you don't need a whole lot of your calories from essential fatty acids. You do need 5-10% from essential fatty acids. And those are omega-3s and omega-6s. And omega-6s come from nuts and, a variety of places. So it's really easy to get omega-6s. It's not so easy to get omega-3s. And omega-3s from plants come from chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, some in the way of beans, some in the way of greens. Walnuts have more omega-3s than omega-6s. And they are essential fatty acid, ALA is the acronym. That's all you need to know. And the other nuts and seeds have more omega-6s and omega-3s. You'd like more omega-3s and omega-6s. They use the same pathway to go to their separate way. Omega-3s go to make things like dopamine and serotonin and anti-inflammatory compounds and anti-clotting compounds. And omega-6s go to make clotting compounds and inflammatory compounds. And you say, well, I don't want that, but you need to be able to clot. If you cut yourself, you want to be able to clot your blood, and you have to be able to make inflammatory proteins or proteins if you get sick and whatever. So you need some, but you don't want to be have an overabundance of inflammatory proteins. So you want more omega-3s. And the omega-3s in plants, ALA, are not the active form. You have to convert them to DHA, and DPA is intermediary, and then there's an EPA. And it's always argued how well people convert ALA to DHA. And, in different populations, it's different. And the question is, do you convert enough? And DHA is extremely important for not only cardiovascular health, but for brain health and dementia. And it's one thing that I'm going to be talking about in future podcasts quite a bit. And it's going to get a little controversial here in the next several weeks. I'll just kind of let you know. Because I'm doing a deep dive into, how much is enough. And there's viewpoints all over the spectrum as far as for different diets, but DHA is very important for brain development. But one thing that was brought to my attention, if I never have been someone that prescribed fish oil because it just hasn't been shown to work. And of course, the fish oil is supposed to have DHA in it. But it turns out that most fish oils are made with the fat part, the fat storage of fish. So just like I said, we store fat, and you could use that storage fat. You really can't. Storage fat is for energy. So storage, the fat you have around your belly, your legs, for the most part is fat that you're storing so that if you don't eat, your body can assess that for energy to keep you alive, to keep your body moving and working. It doesn't use that particular fat, that storage fat, to make membranes or to make other cell membranes or nerve coverings, any of those things that that we need for. Those are the essential fatty acids, and specifically the DHA. And so it's not that your brain actually does need the omega-3s. And, I guess a little bit the omega-6s, but for the most part, the omega-3s, and it's very, very important. So, it brings to mind, and we're going to talk about some of the levels in the future, but, when there's a supplement, it's always questionable. Everybody thinks they take the best supplement, and some people just try to take the cheapest supplement. And how many supplements do you really need? And do you really need the supplements? And do you really absorb the supplements? And can they actually enter, your metabolism where they should? So it's something that I've been doing more of a deep dive into. And, again, my practice, we're going to specifically look at that, just like we've been looking at sunshine and health with thyroid and vitamin D and all of those. I think that it's a whole new area that needs to be explored. And, I've always said that eating a plant-based diet is not that easy because we've all grown up eating what we would call the standard American diet. And, to eat a plant-based diet, are you getting everything you need? Are you getting your greens? Are you getting, adequate protein, fat, carbohydrate mixtures? Are you, not eating processed? Are you getting enough calories? Are you getting enough nutrients? And, a junk food vegan diet is certainly no healthier than a standard American junk food diet for sure. And so we have prided ourselves into helping people to eat an adequate diet for their stage of life and their condition. We certainly move the plate, whether somebody has some inflammatory condition or cardiovascular condition or cancer, to get them the nutrients that they need. And so this exploration is no different from that, in that we are starting to explore with our members, how do we make sure, as far as these essential fatty acids, are we getting people what they need? Again, same way as in sunlight and vitamin D. So I think these are areas that are very exciting and actually add, a new spark to doing some research and how do we make this plant-based lifestyle even better. And, I want to thank you for listening. If you have any interest in our practice or would like any help navigating some of these waterways, if you're new to eating plant-based, we certainly love to help you and tailor a nutrition plan for you. You can go over to drdulaney.com, DOCTORDULANEY, and look what we have to offer as far as our membership. There's lots of ways that you can become a member of our practice, all the way from just being an online member, all the way to being a full member of the practice. So check that out. If you have questions, you can email me at jami@drdulaney.com, JAMI@drdulaney.com. And as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. I kind of like this format better, this video format to some degree. I know you can't see me, but it's easier for me to ramble along, and I can get podcasts out quicker. So we might have more of these audios for the next few weeks than the video ones. You can give me some feedback on that too. But once you see my face once, you don't need to see it again, other than to ask, geez, how old are you really? But nevertheless, thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week. Take care.